We've seen this now for 2 straight election cycles, right? In 2016, we saw the rigging of the DNC. Here again, we're seeing the exact same thing going on, right? Trying to make it so that certain people are lifted up and then others who are outsiders, who are big-time outsiders, are just pushed away. Tulsi Gabbard has been one of the most interesting people to watch when it comes to what she says about a lot of the things that American media do not want to admit about things like the Syrian war, or her call out of certain politicians and corruption that's been going on here and there, right? Anytime you have a candidate who's doing that, it's more than likely that the media is not only not going to like her, but the individuals behind the media who run the media and who run, like she's saying, the country at the end of the day, are not going to like that as well. And this is why Tulsi has been sort of blacklisted, if you will, much like you saw with Bernie Sanders back in 2016. Although I would say Tulsi is coming out with much better policies, much more interesting revelations. But what we're seeing here again is the DNC ultimately rigging the poll or the election such that she doesn't even have an opportunity to be on the debate stage. And we saw that for a very particular reason that happened between her and Kamala Harris in the first primary debate, which we're going to get to in a second. But I want to first look at this Fox News clip where she's talking with Tucker Carlson about not only why the DNC seemed to push her out via some of these poll stipulations that ultimately knocked her out of the second debate, but at the same time we're going to get into a little bit about what she says regarding the government. So let's have a look.
I think the bigger problem is that the whole process really lacks transparency.
Right.
People deserve having that transparency because ultimately it's the people who will decide who our Democratic nominee will be and ultimately who our next president, commander-in-chief will be. And when you see that lack of transparency, it creates, a lack of faith and trust in the process. And I think this also points to a bigger issue and challenge that goes beyond the DNC and party politics, is the government itself.
Right.
There's people who are increasingly losing that faith and trust in the government because they see a lack of transparency there. They see that we don't have a government that is of, by, and for the people. And really what they see is a small group of really powerful political elites, the establishment, making decisions that serve their interests and maintaining that power, while the rest of us are left outside. The American people are left behind.
Okay, so a number of interesting things that she said there. Obviously, she's referring to the whole election process, doesn't have any transparency. People don't really know what's going on. There's an interesting point to be made right there for sure. Then she's talking about how this even goes beyond party politics. It's not really about the left versus the right. Ultimately, it's about something even bigger, which is there seems to be a political elite that, regardless of all the party politics, controls this entire situation anyway. But there is one thing that she says within that sort of, contradicts what she said in the previous statements, which is she's saying that ultimately it is the people who are going to decide, who represents the DNC. We know that this is not true. And I think we've seen, back in 2016 when, Bernie Sanders was very systematically removed by the DNC, regardless of how many people supported him, and the fact that it was more than likely that he was going to be the people-chosen representative. The DNC rigged the entire situation to push him out of the picture and ultimately pick Hillary. There's so many reasons as to why that was the case. We've covered it in deep detail. Deep state is part of that reason, ultimately, at the end of the day. So now here we are again, seeing that the DNC is rigging the situation once again. You had, Kamala Harris and Tulsi get into a little bit of a spatter in the debate there, where, ultimately Tulsi had stated, when talking about Kamala Harris, she said she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she asked if she'd ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence that would have freed a man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California, and she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way. So after that particular revelation from Tulsi, Kamala Harris essentially was like, sort of speechless. A lot of people who were watching the debates at that point looked at that and said, wow, someone just came out and pretty much just wiped the floor with Kamala Harris, and she became one of the most searched candidates after that debate. Now, of course, this is a problem because now, much like what happened in 2016 with Sanders, a lot of people are starting to pay attention to Tulsi Gabbard. It's growing, 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 growing. Well, if you get more public approval, you get more public interested in what's happening, all of a sudden the rigged candidates that you're putting in place can't entirely have the same power as they did before. And then you again get into a situation where you now have to start making up ways to get rid of these people when it's really late in the game. So what happened here? The DNC decides to ultimately get rid of Tulsi nice and early on so that, you know, more people aren't going to see, you know, her wipe the floor with other of these top candidates during future debates, right? So ultimately that's what happened here, right? And this is why I found that comment about, you know, ultimately the people are going to decide. I found that to be a little bit odd because we know with evidence that that's not true. Going back to the transparency thing that she mentioned where she said, you know, people don't see transparency in the election process. This is a very big part of that, right? You're seeing that it's like, well, why did WikiLeaks have to come out with emails proving that the DNC rigged the election and knock out Bernie Sanders? Well, because there's no transparency. The people don't really know what's going on. Some people who are a little bit more aware and are willing to ask questions are able to see, yeah, there's something not right here. There's something weird going on. But the general public has no idea, and they usually take what the media says, you know, hook, line, and sinker. So when WikiLeaks come out and says, hey, this is exactly what's going on, and everybody sees it, and half the people are going, well, it's a conspiracy theory, and the other, you know, chunk of people are saying, well, yeah, no, this is kind of what I thought anyway, right? We're seeing that current events that are happening in the world are responding to the fact that humanity is waking up, right? And this is a big part of why I think some of these things that are happening are a lot more important than people are seeing. What we're seeing in the election process is something that a lot of people have been seeing for a very long time. Transparency is coming in the form of the revelation of corruption. So when you start to see, like, people usually, you know, think, oh, voting, that's a responsible thing to do. When you vote, your voice is heard. This could not be further from the truth. But yet people year after year still hold that within themselves as if there is truth to it. Now, here's the reality of the situation. We've seen this now for 2 straight election cycles, right? In 2016, we saw the rigging of the DNC. Here again, we're seeing the exact same thing going on, right? Trying to make it so that certain people are lifted up and then others who are outsiders, who are big-time outsiders, are just pushed away. Of course, the media responds to that. They focus on bigging up Kamala Harris, regardless of what, you know, Tulsi just revealed about her, and putting down Tulsi Gabbard, right? Continually responding to what the deep state or what the elite behind the government ultimately want. Intelligence agencies were set up by elite deep state figures such that they would have ultimate intelligence about what's going on.